This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I am your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Andy Freed, who is the CEO of Virtual Inc., a strategic consulting, marketing, and professional services firm that supports mission-driven organizations facing multi-dimensional challenges in technology, healthcare, financial services, and life sciences. These include membership groups that unite some of the world's largest brands, like Microsoft, Meta, and Google, to collaborate on shared industry goals. Virtual has been recognized as a best place to work, guided by integrity, collaboration, and client-first values. With more than 30 years of experience leading organizations through growth and transformation, Andy knows the best leaders succeed through clear, compelling communications. Andy is even more fanatical about communicating to inspire than he is about Bruce Springsteen, which is saying a lot. We'll get into that more as we go here. It is his life's work. From keynote performances to small group strategy sessions, he brings energy, clarity, and intention to every interaction. Andy's passion for leadership communication shines through not only his professional work, but also extends into his deep commitment to community engagement. Andy serves on multiple local boards as chairman and as a board member as well. So, Andy, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Great to be here, Steve.
So, give us a little context here to get started. Kind of where you grew up and what got you into this line of work, and maybe even share with us the first time you saw Bruce Springsteen.
Sure. So I grew up in New York, in suburban New York in the 1970s. So, much as my roots are now firmly in Boston, I still remain a Yankee fan,
Yeah,
which is much of the chagrin of my kids. But every other Boston
sure.
team I'll root for, but hard to make that trip. But I started out my career doing political work and working for a lot of different campaigns until I discovered that the colleges want their student loan money back, and that's not really a way to make that happen, working from
Yeah,
campaign to campaign. So started working with Virtual with my partner who founded the place in '99. I came on in 2000, and he departed around 2011. But we've grown the business steadily ever since, and that business has been focused on technology organizations and trying to help them form, change, and grow. So I've always been passionate about organizations like that, and the soundtrack behind it all was always Bruce, and started
yeah.
listening to Bruce also in the 1970s, but didn't have the money to go to concerts until about 2000. But I've made up for the lost time by seeing him about 90 times live in concert. So, something that I just love doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they are definitely an experience, that's for sure. They're great concerts.
Absolutely.
Now, you spent a little time too as a Division One athletic coach. True.
Yeah, so I was the head water polo coach at Harvard for a while. I
Uh,
played when I was an undergrad. I went back to grad school and had the chance to coach. Learned a ton from that. I mean, one of the things that you learn as a leader with that when you're coaching is that your success is 100% in the hands of others. And as much as you think, especially with me as a young coach then who had only recently been playing the sport at the D1 level, you start realizing that, it's my turn now to figure out how to tell somebody how to do something and teach them how to do it instead of doing it myself, and how challenging that can be and what an analog that is for the rest of your career as a leader.
yeah, I think that's we can all relate back to some of those athletic experiences and how you learn to be a team member and how you communicate with people on the team in different ways because of the different personalities and all those things are definitely
Absolutely.
great carryovers. So, for those that are watching this on video today, I'm holding up the book here. Andy's written this book called "Lead Like the Boss," which the it also says the Bruce Springsteen framework to elevating your leadership. So it's a very interesting book, and anyone who's into music and especially the boss can see the analogies and the metaphors that are used, between a rock star and someone who's leading a company. And there's a lot of similarities, and we can learn a lot from that.
Absolutely.
So tell me, so you said that I can remember just a story on myself that so I love music. It's been a big part of my life, and it was literally probably 1984, and I knew that Springsteen had been on the cover of Time and Newsweek, and he was this huge phenomenon. And I to be honest with you, even though I love guitar-driven music, I love lyrics. I wasn't sure I got it. And so I remember 1984, I said, I got to go figure this out. So I went to a Springsteen concert for my first time in 1984, and I got it. After 4 hours of standing and waking up the next morning sore as anything and seeing what was delivered, it was pretty impressive. So I share your fascination and your enjoyment of watching a Springsteen concert.
Yeah, that's a great tour to have started out on.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. That was Born in the USA tour. So tell us a little bit about. So you get in Springsteen, you see this. You're in a company. You've had some leadership uh, training and experience for sure. And when was it that was it the first concert where you just said, "Gosh, this guy is an amazing leader," or did it take you a while to kind of see
No,
the
look,
parallel?
first concert, I was just happy to be there. But as I started to see more and more shows, I started to watch the way Bruce interacts with the band, started to watch the way he interacts with the crowd, and start realizing that they call this guy the boss for a reason. That he really has figured out that he is not just part of the band, but he's leading the band. And he's not just there with the audience, but he's leading the audience. So started to realize that, and I'll tell you, probably around 2019, wrote down some thoughts about it at some point. Actually, about sorry, a little later than that, 2023, wrote down some thoughts about it on LinkedIn, just things I had learned from a show, and that LinkedIn post eventually morphed into a book because I just realized I had learned so many different things from watching the way he behaved that it was a really good rubric to talk about leadership and communications.
Yeah. Do you have any idea? Do you think he's seen it? Do you think he's aware of it? Did you have to
I
get
do
in?
have some folks through friends of friends. I've been able to get the book to him.
Okay.
That's definitely been in his hands. I signed a copy for him a couple of weeks ago, which at the request of Steve Van Zandt, which was an odd thing to be signing copies of books for Bruce and Steve Van Zandt. I hope they value my signature as much as I value them seeing it.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. I mean, I've followed his career as well, and I do remember listening to Steve Van Zandt one time, who, for those who maybe not aware, is his childhood friend and lead guitar player. And he said that he tried to he's kind of like, well, Bruce is getting all the notoriety and whatever, and so I kind of want to do my own thing. I want to be that solo rock star too, and kind of broke away, but came back and realized that Bruce just had a vision and just had a way of how to do things so well that it was like, if I stay away too long, I'm gonna miss the boat. This is something that he's really got dialed in, and it's kind of fun to see how dialed in he is on that.
No question.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit too about, you talk about in the book how storytelling is a really important leadership tool. And, it helps you kind of understand the bigger picture. And in essence, that's what Bruce is, right? He's a storyteller.
He is, and he's a phenomenal storyteller. If you go to any one of his shows, there's always a moment when the music pauses and he tells a story of himself growing up, or of what the inspiration was for the song, or just where he's trying to go. And those stories are something which one, he's given forethought into the stories that he's telling and when he's telling them in the show and what the story is going to be all about. He doesn't just let it happen. But the reality is that as people, we are wired to hear and remember stories. There's a reason that you tell bedtime stories to kids when they're little. Storytelling is just a natural form of how we communicate with one another. And the brain is wired with the story to try to then figure out and anticipate, if I'm hearing this story, what's next, and what's happening, and it holds attention. That kind of storytelling eludes so many people when they're communicating with their companies. We understand that storytelling works in all of this context, And yet, when we're trying to communicate as business professionals, it's often a set of disjointed PowerPoint slides with bullet points on them that I'm just reading aloud to you.
Mm.
And that's not leveraging the power of storytelling, and that's not working with the brain science that says that stories are memorable. So that sometimes means stepping back from what you're presenting and trying to think about what's the larger story at play here.
And I I identify in the intro of this program, in my intro, that I'm a storyteller, that I identify as a storyteller. So you're speaking to the choir here. But I've asked this question a lot of times to guests on this show. And do you think you can teach storytelling? Do you think you can show somebody that maybe isn't that good at it how to make a better story and how to make a more compelling story and teach it?
Absolutely, and I've done it. I mean, so it's often working on that. That's something which I try to do with my clients all the time. One of the things that I always talk about is you need to explain the why. Why are you doing things? And the why is often the story behind it. So it's the difference between a client that wants to just go right into the bullet point facts and leverage them into a story. And sometimes that story is something you can wrap around everything they're presenting. Sometimes that story provides a compelling answer of why. Sometimes that story is, why they want to do something next. But certainly, I think you can help everybody really parse out from their set of facts a story that they need to tell. And then just the variability is how good they are telling that story. Some folks are natural Garrison Kelliers who can make it come alive with their voice. Some have a little bit more of a struggle with that, but you can coach that as well and get people really good at telling that story.
So it's really cool in the book. Each chapter begins with a scene from a concert, which you titled the set list, and that then every chapter ends with a real life story, which you titled "Taking the Stage." And then there's the think, feel, do part of each chapter as well. So was that something that you came up with on your own? Did you have some help from an editor to how to structure that? How did you come up with that
Well, I
format?
certainly had a lot of help from a lot of editors all along the way. But all of this kind of emanates from just my thinking of how to tell the story of what I'm trying to communicate. And the concert running through the book is just an opportunity to kind of wrap everything I'm telling in a larger story, right back to what we're talking about.
Yeah. And you say in the book too, which is I totally believe as well, is that what leaders do most is communicate. And again, if you take the analogy, how can Bruce Springsteen stand on a stage with 60 to 80,000 people looking at him and somehow connect in a way that you and the audience feel like there's almost this personal connection? Is frankly unbelievable. And a few, not everyone can do it, but a few performers do. He certainly does. It's just a way to connect. So what, is there, what's the secret sauce there? How does he do that?
Well, part of it is by putting the audience first and really thinking about what the audience is trying to get out of the show, and never being far from that. I mean, so many presenters and so many business folks, when they're communicating, it's all about them. What's the story I want to tell? I need to do what are the things that I need people to know? Why am I doing this? And they forget that, well, that's great, but you need to think about your audience as well. What does your audience need to hear? If and I use the example in the book, it might be something as mundane as talking about your new health insurance plan. And I'm going to get up and present that we have a new health insurance plan in the company. Well, if I haven't first addressed people's fears of, well, we're changing health insurance, my doctor's going to change and the coverage is going to be bad. If I don't address that fear in the first 60 seconds of my presenting, they're not going to hear anything else I'm talking about because they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. So if I open up by saying, it's we have a new healthcare plan. The new plan is X, Y, and Z. Here's how you sign up. That's going to go one way. But if I open up by saying, we took some time to evaluate healthcare plans. We knew getting into this how important it was for people to maintain their own doctors and have it be affordable. So with that screen, we decided to go in this direction. Those are two different things. in terms of how your audience is gonna respond. Because in one case, I went right with my facts, and the other, I thought started to think and anticipate what the audience's concerns might be. What Bruce does so well is he has the audience in mind the entire time. What does he want them to be doing? Does he want them to be singing along? Does he want them to be quiet and listening? How does he connect with them? Where does he move on stage to connect with them? If you watch a Bruce show, he uses his body to connect with people. He'll make sure that there's a moment that if there's people sitting behind the stage, that he turns around and plays for them. These are all things that are done with intention and done as part of the show and make a huge difference.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting to me too because, as a music lover, I mean, there's no question that he's a great storyteller and a great songwriter and a damn good guitar player. But you could make the argument, he doesn't have the most perfect singing voice. He doesn't move on a stage like a dancer, but somehow he's got that energy and you just feel it and it just goes right through you. It's just amazing to see how he just sucks everybody in and in a very short time. I mean, first or second song, everyone's sucked in. It doesn't take, most of the
Well, and,
concert.
and that's by intention as well. When we talk about creating that set list, one of the things that Bruce knows about himself, and self-awareness is so important for every leader. Bruce suffers from anxiety and depression. And he knows that he wants to open the show big, because if he opens the show big and sucks everybody in, as you said, in the first song or two, everyone feels like they've gotten their money's worth 5 minutes in. Now he can relax.
Yeah.
And the rest of the show is just on, because he was able to just deliver everyone's value in that first moment. And in doing that, cure his own anxiety about how the show will be, because now the audience is with him.
And I think it's important to point out too, and you do well in the book, is that a lot of times people say, "Oh, he's, so and so is just a natural leader, or Bruce is just a natural performer, and whatever." And maybe some of that's true, but the preparation and practice that goes into that is just, really, really big. And it's not that you just walk out there and strap on a guitar and go. There's been a lot of preparation before he steps on that stage.
Yeah, no question. And that's something which every leader can kind of take away is, the think, feel, do is part of it. Thinking about what your audience wants to think, feel, and do as part of as part of the presentation. But other elements of preparation of, you know, so many leaders will present to an audience and they won't have practiced or rehearsed because they just assume, well, I created these slides, it's going to go fine.
Yeah.
And taking that moment to practice, rehearse. I mean, the E Street Band still practices every day. Bruce is still rehearsing every day, but really rehearsing to get the kinks out and then preparing. And even on preparation is things like, we're now 6 years into the, from the time when everyone went on Zoom during the pandemic, and yet we're still on calls every day where people can't find the mute button. That's part of preparation. If people can't hear you, they're definitely not listening.
Yeah.
So thinking about things like that, thinking about if I'm going to be online, maybe it's time for me to invest in a ring light. It's been 6 years. Ring lights are about $18. I think it's probably worth it to just kind of, do things where you're set up. So if I'm going to be online for a meeting, I'm lit, the way I should be lit. These are
Yeah.
all parts of preparation that go into being part of communication.
You also say in the book too that I love when you said communication isn't about what's being said, it's about what's being heard. So understanding what the audience needs and wants and delivering that is you can say the most profound thing in the world. You think it's the most profound thing, but if it doesn't connect, so what?
Absolutely. And that's something which is so critical in terms of just thinking about your audience and understanding that, in the end of the day, Bruce knows he has some successful songs when he's leaving and he hears people singing the lyrics, or when they're singing it back to them, during the concert. If you're presenting and your audience can't sing it back to you, then you're not really landing the message.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about you say this think, feel, do part of the book, at the end of each chapter, and you say that feel is the most ignored part of those three. So Again, if we related back to what we're talking about, Springsteen concert, I guarantee you, you feel that concert. That's a big part of it. So, tell us a little bit about the think, feel, do.
Yeah, you feel that concert, and there's times when during that concert he wants you to feel different ways. There's times he might want you to, feel kind of, more quiet and nostalgic because he's telling a story, and times when he wants you just to feel pure energy. Now, feel for a leader also means understanding, what do you want your audience to feel at the end of the presentation? So if I have a chance, if I'm presenting my company's financial results, do I want my audience to feel that we need to do better and that they're challenged, that we need to improve? Do I want them to feel that like we're really satisfied with where we're at? Do I want them to feel that, wow, where we got to is a surprise and we should really be incredibly proud? Those are three different feelings. But understanding that feeling piece, that can also be gating to people understanding you at all. Back to that example of health insurance, if my audience doesn't feel safety, if they don't feel that I have taken their needs into account, they're not going to hear anything else I present because they're going to be so stuck on how this impacts them and whether or not they should feel safe that they're not going to hear anything. And Simon Sinek, the great writer and leadership guru, he wrote that that's what leaders do best. Great leaders make people feel safe. And understanding that feeling and understanding what you need to be doing on that and making that intentional is such a key part of leadership communication.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too how he mixes up the how he delivers that message. Again, I'll go back to my first concert, 1984, when he came out on that stage with an acoustic guitar by himself and sang a Point Blank. I mean,
Yep.
you could just feel the hair on your arm stand up, and you could picture this woman and this thing that was going on, and it was just like it just blew my mind that he was able to do that in that big a setting that intimately with that many people. It's freaking amazing.
And that's where I'll say if folks are listening to this and say, well, I'm not Bruce Springsteen. It's, well, you're not operating at that same degree of difficulty. That's fine.
Yeah.
You've got, when I'm presenting to my team, I've got 200 people in my company. They all know me. They all know the topic. I'm often in the same room with them. Um, I've, in really, if you looked at it evenly, I have every advantage over Bruce. I know the people. We care the same things. They know me. I have more time with them, and yet my presentation at times isn't as good. Why is that? It comes down to how much intentionality I have of, do I really care about that presentation, and am I really striving to take it to that level? That's attainable for anybody.
Yeah, and I've talked to leaders too who think like if you say, well, as you do in the book, leadership is performance. You're a performer whether you like it or not. And a lot of CEOs will shy away from that and say, "Oh, that's not me. I just want to, make sure people are doing their jobs and holding them responsible and accountable and things like that." But the best are performers.
Yeah, and like it or not, you're on stage 100% of the time as a leader. If I'm in that same staff meeting and somebody else is presenting, and I start looking at my watch and checking my phone, whether I know it or not, I am communicating to my entire company at that moment.
Yeah.
I'm communicating what I think about that presentation, how important it is, how they should react to it. I'm performing in a very big way at that moment.
Yeah, for sure. I love the analogy you used in the book too about when you compared the cost analysis of 10 people on a Zoom call compared to what you've spent on Springsteen tickets. And, because sometimes we think, oh, it's not that big a deal. It doesn't cost that much money to do this and whatever. But yet the impact of that meeting is profound. And if you look at it from a financial perspective, it could be significant.
No question. There's nothing more valuable than people's time. And, some of these calls, when you have 20, 30 people together, that's really a very expensive call when it comes to time, and resources. And, look, if we're wasting 10 minutes of that call looking for the mute button, and then we're spending the next 20 minutes of the call on business karaoke of somebody just reading their slides to me, we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
It's way too valuable, and a huge investment of people's time, energy, and emotion that we want to respect to carry things to the next level.
And explain a little bit, like you do in the book, the 70-30 rule and the 7-38-55 formula. T Tell us what
Yeah,
that.
it's just understanding how important nonverbal communication is. And that's where I will say we've put ourselves at a disadvantage with how heavily reliant we've become on Zoom, Teams, and other and other forms of online meetings, and that we're missing out on some things. I mean, if you just look at that 70-30 rule and start thinking about body language, well, one of the first thing that's most important is eye contact. Well, eye contact is physically impossible on Zoom or Teams. You cannot look at your webcam and look somebody in the eye at the same time. It just can't be done. The camera's on the top of the screen, the eyes are in the middle. You got to pick one or the other. So just that is challenging. So understanding that so much of communication is nonverbal. It's your tone, your pacing, your body language, all of those things play in. It's where, Teams is a great substitute for a phone call, but face to face is also has a value over and above Teams, Zoom, or anything else because you can really use all those tools that are at your disposal.
Yeah, and I think also knowing your audience and how they react to certain things with body language. I mean, the two extremes are, again, watching Springsteen, sometimes you think, oh, he's kind of overdoing it a little bit, or he's kind of like overemphasizing the movements and the facial expressions and all that, yet can contrast it to the guy that walks up with a guitar and goes to the mic and doesn't smile or doesn't say anything and just starts singing. It's a very different way to communicate that. And I think, some audiences will do well with one and some audiences do better with the other. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like you got to be able to go back and forth.
But it's also recognizing, as Bruce does, that he is the pinnacle of passion within any arena that he's playing. And that's something I think leaders also forget, that especially if they're repeating the same message over and over again. And Bruce ultimately repeats some messages incredible numbers of times. Some leaders will bore of that. And they'll say, like, well, this is the fourth time I've talked with the company about this change. And they just start phoning it in. Well, if I deliver a performance and my energy level is a 6, I can't expect my audience to hear it at an energy level of an 8. They're going to come in at a 4 or a 5. So recognizing that I'm the one that cares the most out of this message, and I've got to deliver it with some energy if I expect my audience to respond with that same energy.
And I think that repetition is a really good point. Again, a personal story. When I was a CEO of a company, I wanted us to become and be thought of and known as what I called the learning organization. So I used that word so many times, as a learning organization. And since we are a learning organization, and I just used it all the
Yep.
time to the point where people would tease me about it, that, oh, here he goes again with a learning organization. Yet, you knew that it connected when someone else is talking, and then they say, because
Exactly.
we're a learning organization, and it comes back at you. So then it's like, okay, it's working.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, Bruce has said that he knows he's written a good pop song when you hear 50,000 people sing it back to them.
Yeah,
And for Bruce, what you're just describing is, look, he's played Born to Run. As of today, he's played it 1,878 times live.
yeah,
And every time he plays Born to Run, he brings energy to it because he knows there's people in the arena that have never seen him before who are wondering what the big deal is. And there's people in the arena like me who have seen him 94 times before, and they're trying to compare this to the other 94 times and see if he's lost a step. So he's going
yeah.
to give it his all. For leaders who have to have a message, as you said, with a central message that they're communicating, whether you're being a learning organization, if 3 times in saying that you say, I'm tired of saying that, I'm going to say it a different way now. Well, people need to hear something 7 times before they retain it. So if I
Yeah.
start varying my message on time number 3 because I'm bored, it's like the equivalent of a doctor prescribing you medication and saying, well, I've taken 3 doses of it. And even though the doctor said I need 7, I'm done with it. You're not going to get better. You are moving off the dosage too fast. So if I move off that message in 3 times instead of 7, I'm moving off my dosage way too fast.
And being open too to how you come across, maybe through somebody telling you, or maybe you see it on video or whatever. You brought out in the book that you kind of had a habit of one time of speaking with one hand in your pocket, and just what that says, and what some people may think of that, or just the body language of it. You just need to be aware of all that stuff.
Absolutely. The self-awareness is so key, and having folks around you and around your organization that also can give you feedback on how you can improve.
I think it was cool too when you talk about performance and keynote speaking and presenting to your team and groups, is the power of pauses. And again, Springsteen's very good at that too, where sometimes he'll build that tension, and then pause, and it just makes it more impactful. The other person I think of, who's a great orator that just really knows how to pause is Barack Obama. He knows
Mhm.
how to kind of slow it down and stop, and then let it sink in, and then go again. And I think that rhythmic part of speaking is very effective as well. You're just not, sending out a bunch of words without any rhythm to them.
Absolutely. And again, it's using all that stuff intentionally and understanding that this might be a moment that I want this to sink in, and I'm ready to also deal with the uncomfortable silence that a pause creates. As a speaker, often folks will create that moment and then step on it themselves because they're anxious about the silence,
Yeah.
and it loses its impact.
What are some of the early signs that you've seen that where communication is breaking down in organizations?
It starts with when people are singing back multiple lyrics. Kind of when you're saying something and what you're hearing back from people is multiple different messages. So that's one thing where you'll see that there's no commonality of language, no commonality of messages, and that people are all over the place. The next piece that you'll see, when that kind of plays itself out a little bit more, is that trust starts to go away. People start to ascribe different motivations and different intention to every communication that they see. And I've seen that with organizations. I tell the story in the book about a firm that had gone through a change, and they decided that in their neighborhood, all of the restaurants in their neighborhood were open for lunch, and that was it. They were open from 11 to 2, and then they'd close down. So the firm's leadership got together and they said, we're going to create a cafeteria in our office, and it's going to be open until 6 o'clock every night. And they just decided to at some point put out an announcement that we now have a cafeteria that's open every night until 6. Well, there wasn't trust in the organization. So when they put that notice out, what the organizations, heard wasn't, we care that the restaurants have closed. What the organization heard and ascribed to it was, can you believe they want us to stay here every night and have dinner here, and keep working through the night because we have this cafeteria that's open until 6 o'clock. This place isn't family friendly anymore. And there's no work-life balance because they want us to stay here for dinner every night. And lo and behold, a few people left the firm to start another competitive firm that was going to have better work-life balance. And before you know it, some people followed those people. And then some clients left, and then the firm wound up hitting the rocks. Now, the only reason they went bankrupt, the reason they went bankrupt is not exclusively that cafeteria, but it didn't help.
Yeah.
And it didn't help that it was just a question of they never communicated the why on why they were doing this. Had they just said from the get-go, hey, restaurants in our neighborhood close early. We don't want you to be hungry. We've done this. And we're not expecting you to stay every night till 6. But we also know that some nights you might want to grab something on the way home. Here's a chance to do it. Um, Had they just filled in that blank, they would have been better. But they left it to the organization to fill in the blank, and it went in a different direction.
Yeah. And I think you need to be aware of different interpretations. I know if you're into Springsteen's lyrics, have you ever, heard somebody like singing back a song or saying something about a song, and they say the lyrics, and the lyrics aren't right. They heard something different, you
Yep.
know. I always remember the story. I think it was a story where the first time the Beatles met Bob Dylan, and he asked him, did they like smoking marijuana? And they said, well, we haven't really yet. And he says, but in your song, Hold Your Hand, you keep saying, and I get high, I get high. But what they were really saying is, I get by. But it sounded like high, so it was just a different interpretation.
Yep.
So, I mean, you got to be open to, we see that all the time when kids are singing, at the top of their lungs in your car, and you're like, What was the lyric you just said? That isn't what it
Yep.
was, but that's their
Or in
interpretation.
the other direction, you just described why I got a lot of eye rolls from my daughter at a Taylor Swift show.
Yeah.
I had the lyrics wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Um, and then I think there is a balance. We talked about preparation and how important it is, but there is a balance between that and spontaneity. Because I'm sure there's times during Springsteen's show or during our presentations or whatever where you just feel something and you just sense something and you go with it because you have the experience that this is going to work. And so it's not 100% scripted out because I think people can tell that too.
No, 100%. And that lends itself to more authenticity. You got to respond to what's happening in the room, respond to the person you're communicating with. And but you can do that also staying within the bounds of both your think, feel, do and kind of the message that you're trying to deliver. Sometimes the enemy of spontaneity is people are prepped so much they have a set of talking points.
Hmm.
And they now want to walk through these talking points in a very, very linear fashion. So that lends itself to the answer I hate the most when I'm in a business meeting, which is when somebody asks a question and the answer is, I'm going to get to that in a few more slides.
Yeah.
That to me is the ultimate in not keeping the audience in mind.
Yeah.
It's about the audience. It's not about you and your slides. And understanding that, that question, is something that should be addressed, not just, well, I've got my slide deck in this order.
Yeah. As an interviewer, I learned, sometimes you prepare and you have this question that you've fallen in love with, and oh, I can't wait to ask this question, whatever. And because you're so set on that, a lot of times somebody may ask that question in the wrong place or at the wrong time, and people are listening are like, well, where did that come from? Well, it's because the interviewer couldn't wait to ask the question that had been pre-scripted, and it didn't fit the role of the discussion, so to speak.
Yep. Yep. Certainly have seen that.
Yeah. So, what was your biggest mistake that you made back when you think over your career that taught you the most about communication?
I think there's any number of times when I just haven't kept the audience in mind, and have forgotten who's the recipient of this communication. I mean, I'll give one example, from my past of there was a time when we were creating some marketing materials for an organization, and the executive director of the group had this big white beard, was a great kind of personality, and I thought, why don't we like kind of make something that's a takeoff of the Uncle Sam poster? We want you, and have him pointing out. I thought this would be a great marketing piece. Well, one of the places that we were marketing was with JCB, the credit card company in Japan. And they pointed out to be, World War II propaganda does not play as well here as it
Yeah.
does in the United States. And maybe
Yeah.
an Uncle Sam poster isn't what we want to be going with. And it was just recognizing that I need to keep my audience in mind on so many different dimensions, on geography, on just what their needs are, what their level is. It's just a reminder. Anytime I've made a mistake like that, it's been because I didn't think about my audience.
And I also think too, as leaders, we need to be willing to evolve. Like what worked once doesn't always work again. You need to
Absolutely.
evolve. And again, let's talk about Bruce. I mean, you go through the 10th Avenue freeze out stage, and then he went into the Nebraska stage, and now he's, continuing to make great music. And maybe with that in mind, would you be willing to tell the story about Last Man Standing that he's been doing lately?
Yeah. So The Last Man Standing is a song that he wrote in 2018. And he wrote it about a band by the name of George Thies. And George Thies was the leader of the very first band that Bruce was ever in, the Castiles. He was in that band for 3 years, from 65 to 68. He wrote Last Man Standing when he came home from being 50 years later sitting at George's deathbed, and recognized that Bruce himself was now the last living member of the Castiles. Everybody else in that band was gone. And understanding, and that's a great story. And one, it goes back to storytelling that I've heard that story and I can retell it to you, tells me something that like storytelling works, because that story is wired in my brain. But it's Bruce now talking about himself, not as the race car driving, long haired rebel that he was in 1975, but how it is being a rock star at 76 years old, that you can find yourself being the last person standing at the first band you were ever in, and the emotion that goes with that.
Yeah.
And he's brought his listeners and brought his fans from being that 24-year-old person that put out Born to Run, to the 76-year-old man that's talking about the death of his band members and being the last man standing. That's a phenomenal run when you think about it.
And I think is it the same person who, reading his biography and reading about Bruce, he talked about how Bruce has reached the pinnacle of rock star stardom, right? He's as big as they come. Yet, was it that guy or one of the other guys from his neighborhood that never made that kind of fame and never became that talented or successful? Yet Bruce maintained that very, very strong friendship, even though their worlds were, going further and further apart from each other. But it was important to him to maintain that friendship that was so important in those early days.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at like Bruce and even somebody who made it, to a degree, like a Southside Johnny. Southside Johnny plays a lot of East Coast venues and, had one or two hits, came up with Bruce at the same time, still great friends. Bruce still shows up at his shows, and we'll do a number or two. But yeah, they operate in very different stratospheres of rock and roll.
Yeah. And I love that too. I'm from the Seattle area, and one of our hometown heroes that's really making it big right now is Brandy Carlisle. And the thing I love about Brandy that I think Bruce does a lot too is they bring people with them. They sponsor them, they help them, they bring them out on stage, they introduce them to new audiences and things like that. And when you say again, take it to the business side, if you can do that for people and find ways to make them shine, I think your organization just does better in the long run.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, the ultimate task of every leader is to create more leaders.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote this book. Was leaders should create more leaders, and what Brandy's doing, what Bruce is doing when they're doing that, they're creating the next generation of musicians, and it's the same thing. It's those musicians creating more stars. Leaders create more leaders.
Yeah, and I think it's true too. The reason the music is such a good analogy is music just brings out that emotional side, and we can all think of, we hear a song and you can almost say exactly where you were when you first heard it, or it brings back a real memory from 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so, understanding that hook, not in a manipulative way, but in a connection way, is sometimes good to be able to share that with people.
No, for sure.
You know, I also think it's interesting, when you talk about in your book, you talk about the message, and we've already talked a little bit about the single message. So, you go back to, I Have a Dream speech, or you go back to other speeches that are famous, and they kind of have that recurring line that's what you remember. Um, but you also talk about how instead of these talking points that a lot of people, get hung up on, you talk about a message triangle. So it might be a little hard on a podcast, but could you explain that a little bit of what the message
Yeah,
triangle?
so it's the idea that talking points are linear. So talking points always go from A to B to C. And that's not always responsive to how the conversation goes. So I like what's called message triangles, which is having one central message that's always my safe place and supporting messages on each side of the triangle. But the idea is that I can do those in any order that I want. And I can always use my external messages to bring me back to the central message. So if you think about like Bill Clinton's campaign in 1992, that was famous for being, I know that's a long time ago now,
Yeah,
but that was
yeah,
all about it's the economy, stupid.
stupid, right?
That was his central message, but it's all about the economy. So any question you asked him, if you asked him a question about health insurance, asked him a question about education, he was going to bring it back to it's the economy. And understanding one, here's my central message I want people to take away, and here's supporting messages for that in any different order. That lets you really follow the flow of a conversation rather than the scripted nature of talking points.
Yeah, and I think that familiarity too is something that, people find comfort in. A couple things that come to mind when we talk about that, like a lot of people say, why does a kid want to read the same book 50 times, at bedtime story or whatever? Is because they know the outcome and
Absolutely.
there's no fear that something
There's
bad's
no
going to happen. They
tension.
know what's going to happen. So there's that. The other story that I think of when I think of familiarity is James Taylor's been quoted as saying, some of his best work, he thinks, from a songwriting and performance perspective, was in the mid 2000s. Yet when he plays a concert, everybody wants to hear Fire and Rain and Sweet Baby James and whatever. And so, you could be pissy about it and just say, well, you people don't know what you're talking about. And, that's, I'm tired of playing that stuff. Or you could say, that's what people want to hear. That's a familiarity piece that he's going to present or provide to his fans because that gives them feelings that really make them feel great about what they're doing.
Absolutely. And look, what you're describing is our behavior in so many things. How many folks have flipped channels and started watching a movie that you've seen 100 times before? I mean, the number of times I've flipped channels and stopped on Shawshank Redemption, and thought, like, why am I watching this movie with ads right now?
Yeah.
And yet I'm still watching it again. And I know that I know how it will turn out. But I like the story and there's a familiarity to it.
So I got to ask, do you play guitar?
I do not.
You do
My son
not.
does, but I've never picked it up.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, it's just something about the guitar that is and Bruce. I mean, everybody knows that Bruce was playing that 1954 Telecaster, everyone knows what it looks like. And again, that's a familiarity thing that he's just kept. One, it's because he loves it, but two, he knows it's kind of what people expect him to come out there with too.
No question. And it's it goes back to how it's become just his instrument of expression. And every leader should know kind of what their equivalent is for that.
I also like in the book when you talk about how important it is to show appreciation to your team. And you described that that Bruce stands at the end of the stage every single night. He's been doing it for what, 5, 6 decades now, and shakes every band member's hand, looks them right in the eye, and says thank you. You know, thinking of that, how many times he's done that to those same people because they've stuck with him all these years. You'd almost wonder, like, do they think it's goofy? But I don't think they do. I think they appreciate
No, what's funny is when you hear them interviewed, and I've heard both new band members and for something like Gary Talent, who's been playing with Bruce since 1973, what they say about that moment is for 10 seconds every night at the end of the stage, Bruce Springsteen makes me feel like the most important musician on the face of the earth.
it. Yeah,
Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing as leaders? I mean,
yeah,
imagine if you're doing that in your whole company, that you have everybody feeling like they are the most important person on the face of the earth. Do you think you're going to have your productivity go up or down from that?
yeah.
And Bruce gets that and takes the time to do it. And look, when you think about that, like, would anybody bat an eyelash or think any different if Bruce said, "I'm this big rock star and I'm leaving the stage first, and I'm going to just walk off and do my wave and disappear into my backstage office"? People wouldn't be shocked at that, but he's getting, but that doesn't create a band that stays together for 55 years.
Yeah. And I love always bringing it back to neuroscience because studies show that actually that form of appreciation or that direct appreciation actually shows a dopamine spike in your system. And so it's, you
It
know,
does.
it's
I
effective.
mean, 100 years ago, William James wrote that the deepest human need is the need to be appreciated.
Yeah.
And that's worth pausing on. When you think the deepest human need is the need to be appreciated, deeper than sex, deeper than money, deeper than power, we just want people to appreciate us.
Yeah.
So how valuable it is when you take that moment to look them in the eye and say thank you.
And there's a great story in the book too that you tell that I like. I'd like you to retell it. What that appreciation what somebody did at a TED event one time with a security guard.
Yeah, so I attend the TED conference every year out in Vancouver, and there's a character at the front door, Frank, who is the security guard at the front door, who greets everybody with a big smile, shakes your hand and just kind of makes you feel good as you're going in. And last year, Chris Anderson, who is the curator of TED, took a moment to bring Frank on stage, and the audience went wild because Frank, more than anything, isn't just the security guard. He's really the first impression you have of the concert,
Yeah,
of the conference. And having that person who's kind of giving that great first impression, who's greeting you enthusiastically like an old friend, it changes your whole day. And they understood that and they recognized it. And Frank stuck around for some of the talks, and the attendees loved mingling with him. But that idea of taking somebody who might be in the supporting cast and having them realize that they're playing a starring role. Borrowing from that same moment, I love when I chair the board at a local hospital. And whenever I'm doing rounds, I make sure I stop at the front desk and remind the person at the front desk that nothing we're doing in the hospital matters if it weren't for her. If
yeah,
people get to that hospital and they have a surly person at the front desk who doesn't give them directions nicely and makes them feel uncomfortable, anything we do upstairs has already been colored.
yeah.
But her greeting people with a big smile and telling them where they need to go and making them feel comfortable and safe, that just helps people feel more comfortable with their care experience.
And getting back to Frank and the security guy, it's just like a standing ovation because he was doing such a damn good job at what he was doing that everybody knew him. It wasn't like, who's this guy?
Exactly.
Everybody knew who he was, right?
Yep.
So
And
yeah.
that's a lesson that like you can be known and you can bring your best game no matter what your role is.
And getting back to always evolving too, you state in the book too that you always got to keep learning. We've talked about, everyone needs to learn and grow, and you're a big fan of investing in coaching. And that again, I'm sure Springsteen has a lot of people that he asks to help, and producers and other band members, and people critique his music and so on. It's just not a one man show.
No, and look, I mean, the E Street Band goes on tour. Their next tour starts in a few days, and they've been spending the last 2 weeks doing rehearsals every single day. As long as they've played together, and Bruce has still been at it for, imagine like Bruce is for 53 years. He's played Born to Run 1,800 plus times, as I mentioned earlier, and yet he still is rehearsing playing Born to Run to make sure they've got it right.
Yeah.
You're never too old or too good to practice.
Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar, there's a website where you can go on and look and see how many times each one of those songs has been played, and it's pretty impressive. But
Pretty
yet,
staggering.
it's staggering, but yet also, getting back to the James Taylor story and whatever, you kind of think of, okay, if I'm going to a Springsteen concert, especially if it's my first one, and I don't hear Born to Run, I'm probably going to be disappointed.
Absolutely.
So you got to play the song, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
got to play the song and you got to bring energy to it. You can't play it like you're playing it just because you have to.
Yeah, and I'm sure you felt this way as did I. I mean, when Clarence Clemens died, you're kind of thinking, "Oh my gosh, what's he going to do now? Is he going to keep the saxophone in the band, or how do you replace Clarence? Whatever." And as we know, is it his nephew? It's a relative.
Clarence's nephew, but
Yeah,
there's a couple interesting stories there. First, it started out not with Clarence's nephew, but if you watch the first few short shows of the tour, it was a horn section, and Clarence's nephew was part of it. And then he started to elevate him beyond the horn section. But the story also is that after Clarence passed away, Bruce reached out to Jake Clemens, who was Clarence's nephew, and said, "We'd like you to be part of the band. Why don't you come down and play with us?" And he came down and he basically phoned it in. He wasn't great. And Bruce's answer was, "Well, I don't care what your last name is. We don't do half-assed here. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you. We'll find somebody else." And Jake was shocked. And 2 weeks later, he called Bruce and said, "I want another chance." And he came down and he just absolutely nailed it. But it's that idea of having a standard and saying that no matter who you are, you've got to meet this standard is, that's part of being the boss, and that's part of being a great leader.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. At the end of the book, I thought you made a very profound statement. You said, the hardest part about writing a book is how do you end it? Like how do I say something that's going to be like people are going to remember and whatever? And you nailed it because what I remember was the book finishes is I'm going to go back and do what Bruce did, and I'm just going to say thank you. Thank you to the people who helped me do it. Thank you for you reading the book. Thank you, and the simple thank you goes a long way, doesn't it?
It sure does. And it's something which so many folks overlook. And look, there's opportunities to do it every day, and just to reach out to the people that, are helping you do the things that you're trying to do, and make them realize that you see them.
And just looking at things, never take things for granted because what you as a leader may say or do to somebody may be very insignificant to you, maybe not even on your radar, but could have a profound effect on somebody. So you just have to approach every situation like it is important, like it is a big deal.
And being present, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Andy, in anticipation of our discussion today, we've covered a lot of ground, but what haven't I asked you that you want to be sure and get in the program today?
I think you've done a great job of kind of, of talking about the essence of the book. And, the book and other things are available at andyfreed.com. I was lucky enough to be early to the domain name race. And, so it's just andyfreed, freed.com, to get a copy. But this has been a great conversation.
And I'm sure that you were you did the Springsteen Broadway thing, right?
7 times.
7 times. I mean, I watched it on TV, which on TV it was amazing, but I just really wish I had had that experience
It
because
was just a masterclass in storytelling, and
yeah.
so fun to hear him talk about the origin stories behind some of the songs and where it all came from. It was just a great show, and encourage people to watch that on Netflix.
So at this time in the interview, I ask my guests the same common question every time. And so the question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Um, I guess what I'll focus on is the thing we were talking about at the end. That as a leader, your ability, your ability to create more leaders and your ability to grow people can stem out of your showing appreciation, and that every leader should show appreciation to folks that are around them, because a leader by themselves isn't a leader; it's a guy in a room. So a leader needs other people who are following them and other people that are around them, and show appreciation to them, and you'll be surprised at how far you can get.
So I'm sure that you have tickets for this upcoming tour. Where are you going to see him next?
Well, I'll definitely see him in Boston. I've got some health issues going on right now, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to travel as much as I'd like. But definitely we'll see him in Boston, and in the Northeast when he's up this way.
And what's the most exotic place you've ever seen Bruce Springsteen?
I saw him in Prague in June, at an airport. He played a big airport in Prague, on the field there. That's probably the most exotic place I've seen him. The best place I've seen him was in Asbury Park,
Mm.
2 years ago, when he played on the boardwalk of Asbury Park for the See Here Now Festival. It was a blast.
I have a good friend, very dear friend I've known for probably 50 years, and he talks about he grew up in New Jersey, and they used to go to Asbury Park. And at the time, he was a big Humble Pie fan. He loved that band, Humble Pie. And Springsteen, very, very early on, was the opening band. And he said that they came out and the crowd was real interested in Humble Pie and didn't know who he was and basically kind of booed him off the stage. And, you think back that story and you think, okay, could have taken that and it could have gone, a very different
Could
way,
have
but
given
he came
up.
back and now he's he's so much bigger than Humble Pie ever imagined they would be. It's kind of an interesting real life story.
No, it's remarkable. But it just goes to that power of persistence.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Andy, this has been a real pleasure. Obviously, I'm a fan of Springsteen and the way you intertwined leadership into that book, and I think it's a great idea. So congratulations on that.
Thanks,
And
Steve. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So good luck with. Hope your health issues improve and enjoy that concert. And how long do you think he's going to go? You see a
He
lot of
has
these
said
guys
he's
saying
not
they're.
stopping.
Yeah.
So he's 76 and just announced a tour. He has said he's not stopping any time, that this is his mission on Earth.
Yeah, and I think, again, not to make this political, but I think that he's also at this stage of his life and his stardom. He's using this a little bit to say some things he wants to say, and so
He is, and,
you
and I'll
know,
say more power to him because he's willing to also forsake some of his fans as that comes up.
yeah, yeah. Well, thanks again for your time today. It's been a real pleasure, and maybe we'll meet somewhere down the road one of these days.
Look forward to it. Take care.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.